Hello, and welcome back to part two of our episode this evening. We'll be discussing the CODA film, and I am thrilled to welcome two individuals, a director and young actor. They'll be joining us this evening to discuss more about the film, and we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. So, first, I want to explain who the director is. Her name is Sian Heder, and she's a writer and filmmaker. She has made several different films and received 3 awards and 8 nominations. Her most well known movies are Mother, Orange is the New Black, Tallulah, and now the latest film is CODA, also known as Child of Deaf Adults. I also want to introduce a young actor from England, Emilia Jones, and she is known for her role in the Netflix series Lock and Key. She plays Kinsey Locke, and I am thrilled to have them on our show this evening. Let's welcome them, and we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. But before we go on, I do want to mention that we have interpreters on the show. Behind the scenes, we have Jack Jason, who will be voicing for Marley and Liz. We also have MJ Grant, who will be voicing for me and Alexis. And we have John Wolfe, who will be signing for Sian and Emilia. So let's welcome them.
Very exciting to have you here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So Sian, I had the pleasure of meeting you when I visited Marley in Boston on the set, and it was just amazing to be able to witness the filming of this movie for an entire day, and I absolutely love the film. I do have a question for you. So when I was there that day, I watched one of the scenes with Marley and Emilia being filmed, and that actually didn't make the cut.
Okay, Sian, what's going on here?
Just out of curiosity, when you're making these decisions about which scenes to cut or which scenes to keep, what goes into that decision making?
It was really Marley's acting that I just had to, I had to throw out that scene because she just wasn't delivering. I'm totally joking. No, actually, that scene was really hard for me to cut because I put my daughter in that scene. So my little 6-year-old came and she was in the scene, and I actually cut her out of my first movie, and then I cut her out of this film. And so she now tells everyone my mom cut me out of both of her movies. So that was a little bit painful. No, we cut 36 scenes from the movie. I have never cut so many scenes out of the film. It was actually really a painful process because there were amazing scenes and amazing storylines that I was attached to and in love with. But when we put together the original assembly, I think the film was 3 hours long, and we didn't want to make The Irishman. So it was just a process of weeding through and seeing if we took this scene out, would the movie still work? If I took this out, could the storyline still work? And I think I just realized that the heart of the movie was this family and all of these side plots and kind of other storylines that we had going on. It was really about Ruby, her parents, her brother, that was the core story, and I just kind of stripped away everything else. But it was really hard. It was a really painful process. We can make the sequel just off the scenes that I cut.
Yeah.
Hey, come on.
There you go.
I'm ready.
Well, it just a beautiful job. I enjoyed it very much from beginning to end, Sean. You hit so many points that really hit close to home for me in my heart. It was just so beautifully done. And thank you for that, Sean. Alexis, do you have a question you wanted to ask? I do. I actually have several questions, if I may. So I realize you're both the director and the screenwriter for this film, and which is amazing and quite impressive. Did this film meet your expectations in both areas as a director and the screenwriter? And if not, how so?
Well, from what I just said about cutting 36 scenes, I think I probably overwrite as a writer. And then you sort of realize as you're making the film how much can be communicated visually, how much you can get just off of an actor's face. So I feel like the script was, it was almost like the script was overwritten. So I sort of made sure that everything was in there. And then I think as you're making the film, you start to realize what is moving and impactful and can be communicated maybe visually. And that's sort of why I was able to strip out so much in the edit. So you sort of have to let go of your writer self when you're directing, because the things you were attached to as a writer aren't really always relevant once you're actually seeing the story come to life. And then your incredible actors are bringing things that you never expected. So there were beautiful moments, I think, where I thought I needed a line, but Emilia was saying everything just on her face. And suddenly I don't need that line anymore because I've seen it in her eyes and I've gotten everything. So I think they're two different, it's like two different hats that you have to wear, and you really discover your movie again as a director.
Wow. So, Sean, as the writer, you were writing about a culture that this is an assumption I'm making, perhaps it's incorrect. Based on my assumption, you don't have a previous experience with the deaf culture or any affiliation with the deaf culture. And here you are writing a screenplay for this.
Well, I knew that going in, and I was very sensitive to the fact that I wanted to tell the story in a way that felt authentic and felt and honored this culture that wasn't mine. And so when I was writing, I think the moment I started writing the script, I started taking ASL because I knew that was going to be something, 40% of the script was in ASL. And it's interesting because as I was writing it, because I'm hearing, and because I think as I'm writing, I hear the dialogue in my head. And I think I wasn't fully aware of how beautiful it was going to be once I was seeing my words. And that process, working with Alexandria Wales, who was my ASL master, that process of sitting with her and going through the script. And I think we sat there for 5 hours one day, just going through, and we would read a line and she would sign it to me. And then we would talk about the signs and why that was communicating what I wanted or not. And that process was really moving to me because I realized I was going to be watching my words. I was never going to be hearing my words. And I really fell in love with ASL through this process. I think Emilia can say the same. But it was really important for me to bring on those deaf collaborators who could educate me and have, CODAs that I was speaking to as I was writing the script. I think I had 3 different CODA consultants that I was working with directly. I read a lot. I made deaf friends. I had them read the script. I got feedback from people in the community. I think it was just really important to me to honor the fact that there were going to be times that I didn't know what I was doing or what I was talking about. And Marley was a huge help. You know, Marley came on, she was the first person I cast. And I really was so happy to have her as a collaborator because I felt like she could put me in check and say like, no, that would never happen. Or, you know, that's not how that family would fight. And I feel like between, you know, the deaf cast members I had and then my 2 ASL masters, Ann Tomasetti and Alexandria Wales, I think I surrounded myself with people that knew better than me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What an incredible process that you worked through. That's clearly multi-layered in the development of this script. And I appreciate you sharing this with us. You also mentioned that Marley was the first person you cast. Can you talk a little bit about the casting process and what that was like?
Well, Emilia won this part from hundreds of girls. I'm not even kidding. I saw so many people for the lead role.
Wow.
I knew that this was going to have to be someone who could learn to sign, who could learn to fish and like be out on a boat and learn believable, you know, look believable as she was pulling in nets.
Right.
And learn to sing and deliver like a vocal performance that was where you really sold that this teacher would pick her out of a crowd and say, you're something special. So finding Emilia was like finding a unicorn. And I'm very grateful that I found her. And then in terms of, you know, I had been going to Deaf West plays, and I'd seen Troy in a Deaf West production, and I thought he was brilliant. It was a very different kind of part. He was this like buttoned up professor. But I knew he was a great actor. And so when he came into audition, he just was Frank from the moment he walked in the room. He had like his cap on and he's hilariously funny. And
that was it. Yeah.
He's totally out of line and dirty. And we all know this, but it's perfect for this character. And Daniel just came in and auditioned. And I knew he'd worked with Marley before, and I knew he'd worked with Troy before. And he just really felt like that working class guy. Like, and he had kind of all of that brooding frustration and anger that I thought would be interesting in that part.
Wow. Wow. This is intriguing how everything just came together. Incredible. There was one scene in the movie that I do have to mention. Without being a spoiler in any way, there were 2 characters who were portrayed by Daniel and Troy. And they are basically in this scene pulled over by authorities. And they were fined for something that would not be considered legal anymore, but it often happens when you're deaf. And how you came up that scene I'm so curious about how you came up with that scene and what was behind the idea of that.
Well, it's interesting because I do think that, you know, Troy and Daniel had some run-ins with the police while we were filming in Gloucester. Like really strange run-ins with the cops. They set off the alarm in their house one night and didn't know it had gone off, and the police showed up and thought they had broken in. Marley and I had a party where the cops showed up. We were in a small town and the cops were clearly like, what is going on here? But it really was, obviously I had written this scene before I had those interactions, but you can see how easily, you know, police officers, especially that aren't trained to deal with that situation, how quickly that communication can break down. And so, you know, the scene really came from me just thinking about these guys and what kinds of situations you could get into. And obviously they're very capable and they're very good at their jobs, but there was something dangerous about them being out on the water and not having the ability to, hear those radio signals when they were coming in. And so I was sort of just interested in watching that dynamic. And Heder Rossi, who was one of our interpreters on the film, who I think interpreted for the previous part of this, her father is deaf and he was a fisherman, and he named his boat Deaf Boater, so that the Coast Guard, when they saw the boat, would immediately know that he was deaf before dealing with any kind of boarding situation. So when she told me that, I realized that I had tapped into something that's actually quite real.
No kidding. Wow. Thank you so much, Sian, for sharing your thoughts with us. We have a lot more, but right now I'll turn it over to Wendy. This is fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And I believe Liz has a question for Emilia.
So first of all, what a beautiful film. I loved every single moment of the film. You were all amazing. You were all amazing. So Emilia, this question is for you. I actually have 3 different questions here. And the first question is, how did you prepare for this role? Playing a CODA, how was that for you?
Well, that's kind of what drew me to the project. I didn't know anything about ASL or deaf culture. It was something so new to me. And I read the script and I really wanted a challenge. And I've always been fascinated and I've always wanted to learn ASL. And so I was like, I really want to do this project. And I spoke to Sian before I'd been cast. And I remember her talking about the project. And I was like, I have to do this. I want to do this so much. And then to prepare for the role, as soon as I found out that I got it, I started learning ASL. I had this incredible coach, Anselmo, in Toronto, because I was filming Lock and Key season 1 at the time. And so on the weekends, I would have ASL lessons. And he would actually, the first ever lesson I had, I didn't learn any sign language. We just learned about deaf culture. And then he would just teach me ASL. And because he was deaf, we didn't communicate, we only signed. And I think it made me learn a lot quicker. And yeah, the minute I started signing, I fell in love with the language. And it was super helpful because when I got to Gloucester, I met Marley, I met Troy, I met Daniel, and they all helped me so much. And I kind of would sit, when we were all together, I would just sit there and I would watch them all signing, and I would pick up little things that they would do. And same with Sian, like we were both learning. So we kind of went through this journey together. And I signed and signed and signed. I think I signed for 9 months to prepare for the role.
I have to jump in and say one thing, because Emilia and I, we were both learning, and on set, we were both learning very quickly. And when there were days where we were just working, Emilia and I, but because we were on fishing boats, we were boat to boat, and I would be on the camera boat and she would be on the fishing boat, but we realized we could sign back and forth with each other. And so we would be signing on days when it was just the 2 of us on set. On the quarry clips.
Yeah, on the quarry, yeah. When we were filming at the quarry, Sian was one side of the quarry, I was the other side of the quarry. And we were shouting to each other, and I was trying to make out what Sian was saying. She was trying to make out what I was saying. And then we just stood there for a second and looked at each other, and we were like,
oh my God, we can
sign. Like, why are we trying to talk? Like,
Signing, that's great.
And absolutely.
So then we just started signing, and you were giving me notes in sign language. And that was kind of a moment where I was like, this is so cool. I've learned a skill now for life. Like, I'm still having lessons. I've completely fallen in love with the language. And it was helpful actually.
That's great.
Interpreters too, being some of the interpreters were coders, so they would share their experiences and their feelings with me. So I found that really helpful too.
I have to add something. I remember Sian telling me, I think I asked her, who is it that's playing Ruby? oh, who have you cast? And she said, this young woman, and you're going to love her. Just that. No. That's all I need to say. And so then I get to the set in Boston, and we were actually it was Gloucester, Massachusetts. And Gloucester, a small little town.
That's right, Gloucester.
That's the name sign, Gloucester. And this is a sign for Rockport. Anyway, when we met, and I said, Emilia, she's British now, okay? So she has a British accent. And I am fairly good at lip reading accents. So when I met her, I was like, wait a minute, she's a Brit and she's going to be playing an American, but she pulled it off. So, I mean, her American accent, I mean, two things I have to say. One, what I was very impressed with the fact was that she learned to sign American Sign Language. Two, she did her thing, whatever it was, delved into her character. And maybe add one more, she sang. And four, she wore so many hats, and it's all embodied in this one actor. And I have to tip my hat to her. I mean, she's all of 17 when she started shooting this film, and 17 years old. And yet I thought to myself, you know what? She didn't know ASL before we got here. So I said, Sean, how's this going to work? Sean goes, don't worry. And we all got together for dinner. It was a cast dinner the first time we got together before we actually started shooting. And there she was signing fluently without an interpreter. She picked it up so quickly. So, I mean,
kudos to you.
We were fortunate to have a really good actor on board. I mean, how to be able to pick up all of that. And so beautiful to look at. Look how beautiful she is.
Absolutely.
You too, Sean.
Mums are biased.
Oh, no, not biased at all. I know, no. Anyway. And Liz is saying, and like Marley said, you were able to sing, you were able to sign, you were able to speak with an American accent, all three of those. How were you able to juggle all those at the same time? I mean, speaking in an American accent, singing, signing, it's amazing. It's amazing. How can you do that? How did you do that?
I'm curious too.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I mean,
she's a good actress, Marley said. She's a good actress. She can
absolutely very skilled.
No, but do you know what? I think it was just that I fell in love with ASL. I absolutely loved working with Sean, and I loved Marley, Troy, and Daniel, and all the cast and crew so much. So I think it was just all of these skills that I wanted to learn. Like when I read the script, I was like, I've never, I sing in the shower, I sing all the time, but I'd never actually done something. I'd never sung so people could. I did a musical when I was like 8, but that was it.
But you signed so fluently. I mean,
well, I don't know. I think it's how my brain works. Maybe I'm a very visual person.
I will jump in and say something about the signing, because I remember when I was casting Emilia, there were 2 girls that I had it down to, and I knew it was going to be one of these girls. And I had them both sign a scene. And it was a really hard way to learn because they weren't working with a coach or anybody. I just had...
You sent a video.
I sent a video. So I had my friend Hillary Back, who's also a wonderful actress. I had her make a video for me of the scene, and I just sent it. And I got these videos back, and this was just these 2 actresses. Like, Emilia doesn't even know this story.
I don't. I'm so interested.
And I showed, and of course, like, their signs were not going to be perfect because they were just, no one had taught them the signs. They were just watching this video. And I was working at the time with Moshe Kasher, who is also a CODA. And I showed him these 2 videos, and I said, can you just look at these 2 signed scenes? And he
okay.
said about Emilia, she signs, her rhythms are right. Like, even though the other girl could sort of make the signs, she didn't have that same like fluidity in her body, and she didn't have the right rhythms with the sign. And then I showed it to a bunch of other people and deaf friends, and people were like, it's her, you believe her, you believe that she has been signing her whole life. And at that point she hadn't even started to learn to sign. So I think there's something in your body connects to it as well, because I think you did pick it up very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true.
It's intuitive, right? It's intuitive, Liz said.
And the video, the link had expired, so I watched it 3 times. And it was about, I think it was on a Friday or something, and the weekend was coming, and then I was flying to Toronto to film. And I remember watching the video 3 times, and I was like, okay, and then I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make a tea, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start practicing and kind of breaking it down. I clicked on the link, and the link wasn't there. The video wasn't there anymore. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, it's the weekend. No one's going to be working. So I was panicking. I was really, really scared. I was like, oh no, how am I going to...
Oh.
But I did remember that I had to sign Berkeley in the video, in the scene. So all weekend I was practicing my finger spelling. I was like I was going really slowly to practice it. And then I think you sent the link, and then I had a night to film it. But I remember I did that fast because that was the only thing I practiced all weekend. And then I stayed up until like 3 a.m. And then I taped it, and I was like, oh, I hope, I didn't get as long as I wanted. But yeah, it was funny because I then had to fly to Toronto and kind of forgot about it. And then you called and said that I got the part, and I couldn't believe it.
There you go.
And then also Emilia learning to sing the way that she did. I mean, at the same time that she was shooting the TV show, she was not only in ASL classes, she was in voice lessons every week. So she worked with 2 different voice teachers to really open up her voice. And your voice also changed so much from the time we first started working till when we were shooting. It was really amazing.
Practice.
Lots of practice.
Yeah, lots of
And
practice.
see, and that's the multi-talent that Emilia is.
It sure is. It sure is, Wendy's saying. Alexis, do you have a question? Well, it's more of a comment. Either people have it or they don't.
Exactly.
Especially when it comes to signing. And obviously, Emilia, you have it.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, it takes quite a special person to do something like this, and you immersed yourself right in it, which is really great. Liz,
it really helps. I have one last question. And Emilia, which scenes were the most challenging for you? To be able to capture? Which one and why?
I'd say when Ruby is auditioning, when I was singing and signing Both Sides Now. That was a challenge because I just had to, I knew that if I did something wrong singing wise and my signing was right, you couldn't use it. And if I signed something wrong, but my singing it just wouldn't work.
Of course. So
I knew that I had to do both the best I could. And I'd never done anything like that, before. I'd been normally when I was signing in the film, I wasn't really talking. I talked a couple of times. So this was kind of a big thing for me. But
it was a shift. Yeah.
It was also probably one of the most fun scenes to do as well, because all the imagery was so beautiful in Both Sides Now. So all the signs were so great. And Anne, my ASL coach, she really worked hard and pushed me. And she came over, I think, on the Sunday, and we spent the whole day going over and over and over and over and over it and performing it. So that was a hard one, but a very rewarding one to do too. Trying to think. The scene when Ruby comes back from seeing Miles, and the Rossies, the family tell her about what's happened. And Ruby's, saying, "Are you blaming me?" That one was my first kind of argument in ASL. And it was my first ASL injury too. And I remember Daniel was congratulating me because I was getting angry, and I was like, I would bang my hand and I had this huge bruise. And Daniel was like, like, yay! So that was the hard one. But
wow, see, that's amazing. That's great. You're amazing. You really are amazing. Marley says, I have a question.
Marley, go ahead.
Um, I'm just curious, and this is for both of you, Sian and Emilia. Not knowing about deaf culture prior to doing this film, or prior to whether you want to say the film was born, how would you two explain to your friends who may not be familiar with deaf culture, how would you explain the fact, what is deaf culture, and so that they would understand?
That's a very good question. I can only explain the way that it opened me up. I found personally, and I can't speak to deaf culture, but I can speak to my experience of, I think most people use a lot of really empty words when they talk, hearing people. I think that there's a lot of sort of what I found from having to communicate with ASL. And the thing that I think a lot of hearing people struggle with when they start to try to learn to sign is that it's not about your hands. It's about embodying the emotion or the thing that you're talking about as you are talking about it. So I found like, I couldn't tell a story about how we went out fishing on the boat and I got seasick. If I'm talking about that with my voice, I can just say, oh yeah, we went out, I got really seasick. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to live what that was. And I think in order to communicate that into ASL, I have to say like, we were out on the boat and I was like feeling really bad. And you have to like live it. And so there's a lot less bullshit. Like I find that it's more honest, it's more true. You're feeling what you're saying. So I mean, you guys can say this to me, but there was something about it where I realized like there's so much language that is, so much talk that is just there to fill the space. And I found that I had to be much more, have much more like intention when I was communicating in sign. And I was connecting, even the fact that you have to look at someone when you're signing to them. There's a human connection there that doesn't exist all the time. A lot of hearing people are talking like this half the time. And I think that deaf culture forces you to really take in the other person and have a real human connection as you're talking.
There you go.
So that was the thing that was and Emilia and I think both, there were things that I just loved that I was doing when I came back to my husband, like waving in his face or like banging on the table when I wanted to say something. And I was like, oh my God, because there's all these like there's something about just like spoken language that's so uptight. And there was something like very freeing and connective about having to look right at the person you're talking to, having to like touch each other more. And so that was just my experience. It was, and Emilia talks about a fight, like an ASL fight, and you can't leave the room. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Or you can't turn away. Like you have to engage still. And so you might be really angry, but you're still living in it with the other person. I think that's so cool. And it was just very moving. And I feel like we as human beings in general could use more of that.
I totally agree with Sian. I think it's more beautiful than words. I like also the scene when Ruby's music teacher asks her how she feels when she sings. And, Ruby can't put it into words because I think ASL goes beyond words. And, like when she's like, oh, this is how I feel, everything inside me, it eats up. And how she's moving, it's like, it's just, it's exactly how she's feeling. And again, as you said, it's honest. You can see exactly how she's feeling without her waffling or trying to kind of, make things make things up or waffle too much. I love it. But I did the same thing. I would wave at my mum, or I wouldn't shout. The whole time I was filming, I'd be in a different room and I'd always come to where she was to talk to her. I stopped shouting from a different room.
Isn't that something?
I think also as a director, it just taught me a different way to work with my actors. I think the first day we were trying to work through interpreters, and first of all, we had to find the interpreters out of the group that could actually like hang in that kind of creative conversation. But also, I realized that as a director, so much of what I'm doing when I'm talking to my actors is on my face, or it's in my emotion or in my eyes. I'm not always finding the perfect words. And so it was really challenging to have, I would be giving a note to Daniel and he would be looking at an interpreter. And I was like, I need him to look at me. And so we all had a big talk after the first day. And we just said, okay, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to walk up and we are going to talk to each other directly. I'm going to sign as badly as I sign, and you guys are going to look at me like I'm crazy. And then we can bring in the interpreter to like clarify if there's a problem. But I really, really needed that direct connection with my actors. And it was so beautiful. And it really like, I've never had a project where we became a family. I mean, I was heartbroken when this movie ended. I'm going to cry just talking about it. But I really was. Like the last day of filming, I felt like I was losing my family.
Oh,
like, what happened to me, guys?
Sian. Yeah. Yeah, and this is Wendy's saying this is such a beautiful thing. It's like everything just melded into one. How beautiful. Alexis has one final question before we wrap up.
Oh, shoot.
Alexis?
I wanted one. Okay.
So what was your experience like working with a deaf cast? So when you're working with deaf actors, what was your initial expectation? What did you learn from working with the deaf cast?
And then let me reinforce that by asking if you wouldn't, Alexis, if you don't mind, not kill me. Okay.
I might, but that's okay.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, well, only because Sian was explaining about how it works in terms of communicating with actors and having to rely on an interpreter, but you wanting to look at the actor in the eyes and not to have to pay attention to the interpreter, and you'd rather work one-on-one. And that was, and it was good. Listen, we all understood her, regardless of whether she thought her sign language was bad or not. And I just wanted to add to this question by saying, as a director in Hollywood, I would ask Sian, what message do you have for directors in Hollywood in hiring deaf actors and the expectations that they might have? Is that okay to add? Alexis, do you mind?
Absolutely, but I'd also like to know the answer to both questions. I do think that that's a really important question, Marley.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to know.
Oh, I want to hear the answer to it, but I also want to know what your honest, real, raw feeling is about working with deaf actors, because this isn't an everyday thing. And so it's important for the world to know what that was like.
We could not have told this story without deaf actors. There's no way. There's no way. I truly, like, there have been so many conversations along the way. And when Marley and I first met, there was even talk of like, oh, do we really need deaf actors? Which Hollywood always does, is, does this have to be? Because people are scared by finding a different way to work. And they're afraid to educate themselves on what do we need? Like, yes, it's going to work differently. And to Marley's point, like, yes, it's different. It's not the same. Like, there are ways that I work as a director that I had to figure out didn't work anymore. I usually keep the camera rolling. And then if I have something to say to the actor, sometimes I'll stop them and then I'll yell out to them in the middle of the take and I'll say, oh, just take it back a line, and I'll keep the camera rolling. And that we just had to learn, like, I had to learn that, like, I needed to call cut and I needed to walk in and we needed to have a conversation. There were times where it changed the blocking. You know, I would have an idea about how I wanted to block a scene, but I needed, you know, Troy to be able to see when I was calling action. So sometimes I would flip the scene around so that I would make sure that, you know, actors could have a visual cue. So I'm not going to say that it wasn't a learning process, because there are times where you're on set and you have to solve a problem. I mean, I remember there was one day where we were out on the fishing boat, and I have to speak to the fishing boat because not only were, you know, Troy and Daniel were out working in the most dangerous environment. We were actually out at sea, and they were pulling up those nets, and Emilia and Troy and Daniel were doing all that work. That is a dangerous job and a dangerous environment. So there were safety things that we were worried about, you know, to make sure that we had hand signals when we needed to stop the nets. We had, you know, I remember at one point I was lying on the floor of the wheelhouse and I was holding onto Troy's foot. And when I needed him to react to something, I would squeeze his foot, because there were things that he didn't have a visual cue of. And I had a little monitor on the floor, and I was just like,
wow,
when I needed to do it. But it's like, you figure it out. It's not hard. You just have to figure it out, and you have to be open and creative and say, like, what do we all want to do? And, you know, there was a driving scene, Marley. I remember Troy was driving the car, and Troy and Marley were driving, and I was in the trunk, and truly in the trunk with my cinematographer and the camera operator in the back seat. And I realized
you were in the trunk. You were really in the trunk.
And I couldn't talk to Troy or Marley because we couldn't see each other. So it's just like, there are times where you end up on set and you just have to figure it out. But we did. And it was all like, there were things like Emilia and I figuring out that signing was a better way to communicate boat to boat. Or I remember Marley when we were shooting that concert scene, and there were, you know, 300 extras in the scene. And when I had to talk to my actors, instead of having to climb over all these people and climb over the rows, we could sign. I could give them a note across
just a wave, get our attention.
And get her attention. And we were having this private conversation, but it was in front of 300 people. So there were things that I discovered that were easier. And then there were things that we had to figure out. I mean, we realized my editor didn't know how to sign. And so my editor was going to be watching these signed scenes and would not know where to cut the scene. So we realized we had someone on set whose job was always to do a track, like an audio track for the editor, where they would just be speaking all of the lines. So when he was editing, he could turn on that audio track to make sure the lines work. So what I will do, Marley, is we should just write a handbook and just give it out to every production and say, like, these are the things that make it easier. And I think the more people learn that there are different ways to work, the more that this will just be like, you just make these adjustments. I mean, you make adjustments all the time for any kind of actor's needs. So, you know, I've worked with, you know, actors who only work for certain hours out of the day. I've worked with actors who, you know, have certain needs. It's like, you're always going to be adjusting. And I think hopefully we're moving into a time where people understand that, like, in order to tell authentic stories and in order to have true inclusion, sure, you might have to change a couple things about the way that you work, but it's ultimately so worth it. And Emilia, I mean, you can speak to it too, but there were, you know, sometimes Emilia would be in a scene and she would be I could yell something out to Emilia and she could sign it to them if they were at the dinner table, or, you know, so in a way, like, some of the CODA dynamic was happening on set as well.
At the dinner table, when we were having dinner, I think you were in a different room or whatever, and you would say, "Can you tell Troy to move over? Can you tell him to not to put his knife and fork down? He's too loud. He's too loud. You need to tell him to be quiet because we can't get your line." And I was like signing, and that was kind of quite early on in the film too. So that was kind of a moment when I was like, okay, oh my gosh, we are all the characters, you know, we became the Rossies, like we were all so close. But yeah, I think these characters could only be played by deaf actors because they could only do it justice. No hearing person could, you know, do these characters like Troy, Marley, and Daniel did. It's such a beautiful language with so many nuances, and I think it wouldn't be right if anyone else played their roles.
And also the ability, I mean, Marley said this to me when I first met with her. She said, oh, you can't improv. Like if you're acting with a hearing person who's learned to sign, you can't go off of those lines at all. You can't have a genuine, honest moment or improvise. And one of the funniest things was like getting to have these moments of improvisation, or, you know, Troy doing something crazy that would make us all laugh, like in that horrible condom scene.
There was no acting in that scene for me.
The condom.
Oh, really? Oh.
He would sign something different every time. So and Sean would come up to me and Ferdy and she'd be like, remember, you haven't heard this before. And we were like, Sean, we don't know what he's saying. He keeps changing it every take.
I was actually wondering who wrote that scene. I thought, well, this is interesting. It's very detailed.
That's for sure.
And
wow.
Yeah, now I understand.
I am dirty. Yeah. I'm a pretty dirty writer. I wrote on Orange is the New Black for a long time, so those things just flow out of me. But also Troy, I mean, Troy is always trying to make the other actor in the scene laugh. And you guys can speak to this. We would be doing very dramatic, very serious scenes. And Marley would be laughing. And I'd be like, why are you laughing? And she's like, it's Troy.
Oh, Troy.
Yeah. So what comments would you have for directors out there? Any specific comments? In a nutshell, what do you have to say to directors out in the field about working with deaf people?
I think learning some sign is really helpful.
Yeah, about working with deaf actors.
I think learning some basic sign was really important because I really found that direct connection was important to me. There are probably directors that, you know, are so brilliant with their words that they can deliver the perfect note, worded exactly right. But, you know, for me, I think having like that, being able to look into each other's eyes and really create that understanding was very important. So I'm really glad that I had learned the sign that I had before I started, and then was really, you know, picking it up quickly on set. And I think just there are things that you might see as, you know, for instance, like a close-up. It was very important to me that during signed conversations that the signs were in frame. And I see so many films where you're seeing this, you know, even great films where they just come in here and you're not seeing those signs. But so it was just about working with my DP and figuring out, like, I don't want every shot to just be this. So maybe we can be over someone's shoulder and we can see the sign from the back, or maybe we can have, you know, it was just really being creative. But I think all of those things that seem like they're limitations are actually opportunities. And being broken out of your way of working can be a big revelation and can create something beautiful and artistic that you didn't know was there. And there were times where I remember Emilia and Daniel had a fight scene on the beach. And usually you shoot the wide shot And you just sort of get that out of the way because the wide shot is just to open the scene and maybe to use at the very end. But watching a fight in a wide shot, an ASL fight in a wide shot, is so cool. And it's actually how you get the interplay in the body language. And so suddenly I'm like, well, I'm going to use more wide shots in this film. And that's going to dictate part of the visual language because, you know, so I think I would just say to directors, like, all of that learning can just lead you to make more interesting work. And I think that was this movie. I feel like I grew a lot as a director in terms of what I thought was how I worked and understanding that there are different ways to work. But I also feel like I grew as a person. You know, I think it made me drop into something about, you know, my own way of communicating and find a more direct path maybe to what I'm saying. I tend to be someone who like talks a lot to actors and maybe over talks a little bit to actors. And it was just interesting to realize like I needed to just communicate what I needed and that was it. And then trust them to take that and find the performance. And so that will probably affect me moving forward in terms of how I work with everybody.
Wow, that's great.
That's great. That's wonderful.
That's what the beautiful thing is about this film is, it clearly depicts the beautiful work that you did, Sian. I mean, just the embodiment of emotion and the nuances and just the intricates of the message was just shining through with the use of the language. It was really beautiful. I'm curious if anybody gave you a name sign. Emilia, Sian, did you get a name sign on set?
Amelia,
well, you did. Marley, would you like to share?
I have a name sign for both of you.
But can I share my story of my one name sign?
Yes. So Sian has a great story about her name sign, and you need to share that, Sian. I know what story you're going to talk about. Make it brief, but tell us.
It'll be brief. I was really wanting a name sign because obviously it's like a cool nickname that you want to have. And I didn't have one. And then we were on set one day and we were working in this house, which had really low ceilings and it was really dark. And my AD is 6'5" or 6'6". He's a really big guy. And he's like blustery guy. And we were working really quickly in this house. And he and I turned around at the same time and we bonked heads so hard that we almost knocked each other out. Like I blacked out, he blacked out. And it was so loud that Troy said, even I heard that. Everyone was like, everybody, that's how loud it was. Like, you could feel the whole room. And so Daniel and Troy came up to me after that scene and they said, this is your name sign. Bonk. So it was two instances. But I need a better name sign.
I love that one.
So I'm going to give you the honor of giving you guys name signs, the two of you, name sign. So Emilia, because you're a beautiful person and you're such a delight to work with, and as a good friend as well, I think, to be in the same company with you, to have that honor, I look and had a chance to look you over. So Emilia is like this. That's your beautiful name. And you have beautiful eyes. So I wanted to say and give you the name sign, Emilia. Emilia. And I love that. And I hope you accept that. And Sian, because, and I had a chance to think this over, director, creative person, charming. And I thought, okay, so there's this. Creativity is like this. This is how you sound creative. So I said like this, Sian.
So your middle finger from your eye.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sean.
Sean. I like that. I like that. Yeah, and I love that,
So
Emilia.
I hope you accept that with the
Like
love
the
that it was
batting of
given
the
to you.
eyelashes. Yeah, Emilia and Sean. That's great.
Sean, like this. Sean, like this.
Sean.
And like that.
Oh, I like that.
And Emilia like
So,
that.
so this is Alexis. Emilia, if you put your thumb in, yeah, and just bat your lashes. There you go.
I ran this by with Troy and Daniel. And the three of us gave it our stamp of approval.
Okay, well, there you have it.
Am I doing it right? So
Yes.
it's like creativity, but like here.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah, so
I love it.
sparkle from your eye.
It's beautiful. Liz said it's beautiful.
Well, it's time for us to wrap up. I do want to thank you, Emilia and Sean, for being a part of our episode, and just such a huge impact that film made on me. Such a deep connection, being a deaf person, having CODA children, and I'm hoping that this is picked up by distributors all over the world. It's incredible, incredible, and everybody needs to see this. Yes. Good luck with 2021 at the Sundance Film Festival, and the best of luck to all of you. Thank you so much again for joining us for the Sound Off Ladies episode. Much love to all of you.
Thank you. Love you.
And thank you to the interpreters. We really appreciate it. We have our two voice interpreters and John, who is the signing interpreter. Thank you.
John.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.